See, he faked me out last time. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to Fridays with Steve. I'm gonna have to make a note: no dramatic pauses in our walk up songs for the events that we do here at Apex. Thanks for joining us, whether it's live or after the fact. So let's go ahead and get started. And actually, a bit of a surprise this week. It's still Fridays with a person here at Apex, but it's going to be Fridays with Steve and Sean. Sean Flahie, our CTO, is going to join me in a couple of minutes and talk to us about his expertise and his experience around tenant-to-tenant migrations. It's something that we're doing a lot of lately. It's something that is really happening a lot in the market. I'll talk about a couple of the business drivers and some business perspectives, but then we're going to bring Sean in. And Sean's really an expert in this space. Looking forward to having a good conversation with him about things that you should be thinking about. So like I said, I'll talk a little bit about the business landscape. We'll talk a little bit about strategies, tools, tactics, communications, different things that go into these successful migrations, right? There's a lot of opportunity here for enhancing productivity, for cost savings, and really want to talk to you and bring you information about how to go do that well. We'll talk about some real world examples, some best practices, some gotchas. I think Sean has had a couple of aha moments over all the customers that we've worked on, and one of the things that does is just allow us to bring you our great perspective, whether it's in an engagement or whether it's in learning and giving back to the community like this. And I hope you walk away with a better understanding of the landscape, right? Maybe there are opportunities within your own organization to tackle some of these challenges, and how can you go and get started. So real quick, just a little bit about Apex. We've been around a long time and have been doing this kind of work, tenant-to-tenant migrations, lots of other things for many, many years. Gold partner, obviously that's transitioning now to a new partner program. We're already engaged there. Hundreds of customers, hundreds of projects, dozens of managed services customers, lots of experience and expertise in the space. And the whole time really focusing and working hard to maintain customer satisfaction, right? NPS and measuring how our interactions, how our engagements with customers are driving, real world business outcomes is just absolutely crucial to us. And it's something we're always making sure that we're delivering on. And so just a couple of quick thoughts before we bring Sean in. The business environment, drives a lot of this. And this is one of those spaces where it's probably good to be a PWC or a KPMG or, Booz Allen kind of consultant, because you sort of win no matter what, right? Things like tenant-to-tenant consolidation, mergers and acquisition, they make sense because they kind of make sense in both conditions, right? Maybe 12 months ago, we were sort of awash in cheap money and cheap capital. We had the opportunity to borrow at low rates for M&A activity, looking for deals, looking for opportunities to grow through acquisition. The financialization and that aspect of business was just absolutely top of mind for everybody. And so that drove a lot of this kind of work for us and for a lot of the customers we work with. And even just, by participating in the industry, participating in the community, we're able to see so much of this work going on. And that condition drove a ton of it. What's interesting and why it's good to be a PwC consultant is now we've got expensive capital. Interest rates are going up, and maybe times are a little bit tougher from that growth through acquisition strategy. But all of a sudden now it starts to be about cost savings or eliminating redundancy, perhaps even correcting some of the largesse maybe over the past few years, right? Maybe you added businesses, added additional solutions and things like that over the past few years, especially perhaps during COVID, right? There was a lot of rapid adoption, maybe not to the same sort of meticulous standards that organizations had always had in place. Now might be the time to correct some of those things, right? We're also seeing some activity around sort of spinouts, sort of the reverse of M&A, where people are taking successful businesses, successful parts of businesses, and spinning them back out, right? And saying, hey, maybe the strategy is to offer this to the market, whether it's the equities market or to the selling market, a component of a business. And so then we're talking about, taking people out of an AD, infrastructure and creating a new tenant perhaps, right? And so we've seen so much of this activity across both of these spaces, right? And right now it's NCE renewal season for those of you Microsoft customers, if that's something that is important in your world. And licensing and sort of your approach to users and devices and the tenants and the Office 365 footprint you have oftentimes can be some low-hanging fruit for some savings, right? And for some consolidation and migrations. And so it's just super interesting to me that in sort of both of these conditions, we really have that opportunity to see a lot of this work go on in the community. Well, that's enough from me. I'd love to bring Sean on and maybe start out with just an easy question and kind of just see where the conversation goes. And so we've seen an increase of work in this space. What kinds of things have you seen driving some of the customers that you've been working with pretty intimately?
Yeah, obviously, like you said, there's been a lot of merger, acquisition, spin-off activity out there in the market. And also there's been a lot of, maybe we've had multiple tenants in our organization for years, and mainly due to culture changes or mainly wanted to just changing the culture in the organization to become more digitally connected. And so companies are choosing to consolidate a lot of those environments that they may have had out there into one.
So that's great, and kind of echoes what I was talking about, that a lot of customers are ending up in this spot where they want to go do this. So where do you coach them on where to start, right? Like, how do you start thinking about this, planning for it, even before you start executing?
Yeah, I think from a non-technical perspective, let's start there. So you got to look at the two different, let's call them organizations or call them Office 365 tenants, whether they're part of the same company right now or not. What is the maturity? I'll call it digital maturity of those two organizations. The one organization, very mature in the cloud, very used to using Office 365 workloads like Teams and SharePoint and OneDrive, and maybe where they're migrating to, they're not used to using that, and they don't really know how to support those environments, or vice versa. So that's kind of a dynamic that you have to investigate first, because the user experience here is key, right? We need to make sure that the users, when they get to the new organization or new tenant, that they're still as productive, or not, if not more productive than they were before. And understanding that maturity of the two organizations, I think, is one thing to really investigate first. The second thing, I'll call it complexity. These migrations can be very complex, and what we say here at Apex, embrace the complexity, right? Dive into these projects, understanding that there's going to be massive user lists that you have to sift through, and old SharePoint sites that you need to determine, am I migrating this data or am I not? And so really digging into each of these workloads and really understanding what's going to be migrated and what the user experience is going to be like at the end of the project.
So how do you coach our customers to think about sort of biting off that, migrate or not versus migrate everything and figure it out later? Like what sort of like triggers do you look for that sort of send you down one path or the other? Because if it all of a sudden becomes hey, let's go through everything in your environment and figure out whether we want to keep it around, all of a sudden that's a huge endeavor.
Right. First one, licensing, right? Everyone's favorite topic. We don't want to pay for more licensing than we need to. So in the I'll call it source and target environments, let's look at the source environment. And is there a bunch of user accounts that are licensed that don't need to be licensed or that don't need to be migrated, so that I'm not going to be paying for those extra, licenses when I get to the target? That's number one. Number two is I look at it from a data and compliance perspective. Yeah, do I need all of that data now sitting in the new environment that's either sitting dormant or has potential risk to it? So if I don't need it anymore, I want to make sure that the data is clean. Understanding that's sometimes a harder conversation when these migrations happen fast. Sometimes, right? It's like we don't have time to go through everything. And sometimes, the decision's made to just take it over anyway.
So one of the interesting sort of conundrums for me is end user communications. How do you coach companies, the IT leaders that you work with, to think about how much to communicate? When is it too much? When is it trying to hide facts from users? Obviously you want this transition to be as seamless as possible, but at the same time, you want them to understand any changes that are happening in their environment, but you also don't want to cause a panic, right? So how do you navigate coaching customers on when is communications just right? When is it too much? When is it not enough?
Yeah. So first thing we have to consider is what is being communicated from a business standpoint. Forget the IT and the technical piece for a moment. What has been communicated from a business standpoint as to are we acquiring a business? Are we divesting a business? And that conversation really needs to come from the business leaders first. Once that conversation has been had, once the users are aware of what is happening from a business perspective, then we like to start with just some teasers out there in different communication modalities. We send emails. We talk to it in our town hall meetings, our all hands meetings, our departmental meetings, just to tease out, hey, this migration is coming. This is a little bit of what you can expect, and this is when you can expect it. Just so there's no surprises when they get more detailed communications coming in the future. And so maybe 30 days, 15 days before actual migration happens for those users, then we get more detailed instructions. Sending them very detailed instructions 60 days in advance, doesn't prove any value to us or many users, as usually gets lost in the mix of daily work. So we like to include more detailed communications the closer we get to the date.
So what about after the migration? How do you think about, how do you coach our customers to think about what to do the day after or the week after? Is it checking in on proactively sort of checking in on problems, or just waiting to see if the phones light up? What are some of the best practices in that post-migration space?
Yeah, I think generally I'll call it cutover day, right? So we cut over on a weekend, or if we cut over users on a weekday, whatever it is, the next day is always cutover day, right? So we've prepared and prepped everything, we've communicated everything, and the event has happened. And now the users are operating in the new tenant for email and OneDrive and SharePoint. And what we want to make sure of is that we have, through Azure Active Directory tools and logging and things like that, we can ensure, are the users successfully logging in? So we can monitor that first thing in the morning, how many users have logged in this morning. Another thing to consider when we do these migrations is security. Multi-factor authentication is huge, and we want to make sure all users are enabled for MFA. So a lot of times when a user gets migrated from a source to a target Office 365 tenant, they have to re-register their phone or their authenticator app on their phone for multi-factor authentication. So we want to make sure that's happening first thing in the morning, and then that they can be productive right away.
So you've talked a lot about users and data. You just mentioned security. So what's your take on policy migration, right? Sort of the rules and saying, again, is this time for a fresh start? or do we just port over what you had been doing, in your previous location? How do you sort of navigate that?
Yeah. I think that goes back to the organizational maturity topic I brought up a little bit earlier, and that especially applies to security. Obviously, if the target environment has better security policies, or they're more advanced in their security posture, the source environment that's coming to that environment is just going to absorb those policies. However, if the source environment is more advanced in their security posture, going to an environment that maybe isn't so advanced, I see that as a downside, and we use that as an opportunity to say, hey, I don't want to become less secure when I get to this new environment. So let's make sure that we at least match, what they're coming from a multi-factor authentication, from a device management platform, things like that, into the target once they get there.
So you talked a lot about migration, and so some of the kind of the native activities. I know, in addition to our expertise and experience on staff, we also maybe use some tools, have some tricks. We probably got a library of PowerShell kinds of things that we like to bring to the table. But are there one or two either partners or tools that you found helpful in certain situations?
Yeah. So, we've been doing Office 365 migrations for many years now, and we've used many tools. There's, plenty of third-party tools out there that can be used to migrate data. Microsoft just released late last year. They now have the ability to use their native Office 365 tools to migrate email from tenant to tenant. And so we've looked into those tools to see what value can those provide to our customers. And really, we've kind of arrived at a few solutions. One of our favorite tools to use is Quest on-demand migration for Active Directory and for Office 365. Just a great tool set that we utilize, and it really brings a great user experience the next day. I bring that up because migration tools. Yes, we're migrating email on the back end. Yes, we're migrating files from SharePoint on the source to SharePoint on the target, but that's all what we do as IT admins, right? But what does that really mean to the end user? The end user on day one, their Outlook has to be flipped over to point to the new mailbox. Their phone has to be reconfigured to point to the new environment. They have to have new URLs to go to access OneDrive and SharePoint sites. They have to log into new Microsoft Teams environments. And when they get to those new environments, all their data better be there, right? So we really know that the tools that we've chosen and we've had experience with, are proven and have given a great experience for our customers.
Yeah, so way back in the day, migrations have always been a thing, whether it was, server to server, domain migrations going back a long time. And I remember one particular set of work we were doing where we were migrating services off a server, and we basically got to the end and we're like, I guess we just unplug it and see who calls, right? Like we think we got everything, but we just don't know. So what have been some of those like crazy gotchas or kind of funny stories from, hey, we did the cutover and, didn't realize that, the CEO had some weird app on his desktop that pointed to an environment, statically or something like that. Do you have a story or two?
Yeah, I think the main thing is to make sure users aren't logging into the old environment when they come over cut over day. It just happens. Their users are in offices, remote, wherever, when we do these cutovers. And if maybe they didn't get the communication, or maybe they were busy and forgot or something like that, to no one's fault, but it just happens. So what we like to do is we like to make sure the old environment is disabled. Users can't log into the old environment on day one. So if they try to log in, they can't. Hopefully that would trigger a memory or two to log into the new environments. The other thing, small nuanced things that you might not think about. We always think about email, very important. SharePoint files, very important. OneDrive, very important. But small things like Teams meetings, right? In my old tenant, I used Teams meetings and I had a bunch of links for my meetings. But when I migrated those meetings to the new tenant, do my links work? So maybe they're into their email and they're up and running day one and everything's great, but they go to join their first meeting and it doesn't work. So we
Okay.
want to make sure that through these tools and through these migrations, we also migrate small things like Teams meetings links. We need to make sure that those meeting links are translated to the new Teams environment. Things like Teams chat needs to be migrated to the new environment so they can keep up on the recent conversations that they were having. Like I said earlier, embrace the complexity. It's not just email, calendar, and files, right? It's a lot of other things that need to be considered as well.
Well, what's interesting to me, and I think what I'm hearing from you is that, it might start out as um, what's thought to be a relatively straightforward conversation about a migration, but then it can evolve into hey, do you realize that this department's doing this and you've got files stored here? And is this really still a thing you do? And it becomes almost a kind of a forced discovery in the environment. And hopefully for a lot of our customers, that pays off in the end because it might clear out some clutter, might have some cost savings to it.
Absolutely. We see that all the time. When we do these projects, we start with the planning and discovery phase, right? And a lot of times we're bringing the export of all the data that a customer has back to them to say what is good and what needs to be migrated and what doesn't. And that usually triggers a lot of internal business conversations themselves, right? Maybe there's groups and there's folders and files that we forgot about that we had for this project before that's not needed anymore. So a lot of those conversations happen pretty quickly during one of these migrations. I think it's good for everybody that it brings it back to the forefront to understand what is actually there in a tenant, because these tenants grow exponentially year over year.
So last question before I let you go. I mean, to me, there's a couple of different approaches, right? There's sort of that phased, maybe department by department or site by site kind of approach. And then there's the one really long night Band-Aid pull. How do you figure out, maybe first, which one do you prefer? But then more so, how do you figure out which one is going to work best for a customer?
Yeah. I'll give the standard consulting answer here. It depends. But if I had to give an answer, I prefer the cutover migration.
Just to get it
The
done.
reason, not just to get it done, I think the main reason is the coexistence period.
Okay.
When you have people that live in one environment and people that live in another environment, and when they try to collaborate, it doesn't work as well as if they're all in one environment. And so, ripping the Band-Aid off or migrating all the users in one night and then, supporting them the next morning, that's definitely the quickest, I think the cheapest, usually, option to get these migrations done. However, that's not always possible, right? If you've got 1,000 users to migrate in one night and you only have 2 people to support those users the next day, I don't recommend doing that. We always say when you're doing migrations, don't migrate more than you can't support the next day, right? We want to make sure that these users are prepared the next morning, that if they have issues, they have somebody to call and they don't have to wait days to get back in, things like that. So when we have larger numbers of offices or users, yes, we'll operate in a staged migration format, and then plan those in a quick cadence, again, to shorten that coexistence time to the smallest possible, so that the experience is better.
Well, this has been great stuff, and you just hit on something I think would be my one key takeaway. I loved how you said, "Don't migrate more than you can support the next day." Right? We can write scripts, and we can probably do tens of thousands of users in a night. But what about supporting them the next morning? So, hey, Sean, this was great. Really appreciate all the insight and all the perspective, and can't wait to have you back again for our next topic.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Great. Thank you. So that was a little bit of time with Sean Flahie, our CTO, talking about tenant-to-tenant migrations and really some things to watch out for, some of our lessons learned and some of our experiences, and just great having him on the show. So next steps, right? Take this information, please use it. Please have it, inform your migrations, you're thinking about doing this both strategically and tactically. And at the same time, we're also here to help, right? If you're a current Apex customer, please, reach out to your account executive. If you're not an Apex customer and you want to talk about tenant-to-tenant migrations and get a little bit of our insight into your situation, give us a call, shoot us an email, sales@apexdigital.com, or just reach out directly to me, S. Thompson at Apex Digital. I'm happy to engage with any customers, anyone in the community who wants to chat about any of the topics that we cover here on Fridays with Steve. Our website has tons of information, recordings, ebooks, infographics, customer stories, a lot of the sort of the sum total of our experience and our work in the space available to you. So again, thanks to Sean. Great stuff around tenant-to-tenant migrations. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.